Hi everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to talk about The God Emperor of Dune. Dune, book number 4 by Frank Herbert. So as always, we're going to talk non-spoilery thoughts and opinions up front, then move over to the spoiler section where we can talk in more detail. So as always, make sure you hit that like button and subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already, and let's begin. So, the God Emperor of Dune picks up 3,500 years after Children of Dune. So, Leto II took in the sand trouts and started his metamorphosis, and as a result, he's been alive for the last 3,500 years, ruling as the uncontested emperor of the universe. The nature of the story completely changes in and of itself. Like a lot of the philosophy that we had before still kind of carries through, but it's almost entirely the flip side of it, which I really appreciate. Well, most of the characters that we've come to know are long since dead, but we pretty much still get access to kind of like Paul and a little bit of Duke Leto, a little bit because of Leto II's prescience ability. He's so thoroughly into his abilities that he can like recall those people, and it's done in such a way where, to me, it honestly feels like we're seeing those characters again. So I really appreciate that way of doing. And again, we have the same Gola character of hate, or Duncan Idaho. He has been basically he's been recloned over and over again over the last 3,500 years. So he's still in the story. So we still get some of our main characters. But the new characters that we get introduced to, I think, are really fascinating because we get to see this other end of this idea of like genetic breeding and stuff. It's like we got to see the beginning of a new factor being introduced into an evolutionary cycle, and then we get to fast forward to the end of it to see the results. I think that's really, really cool. So the story of God Emperor Doom continues the same story we've basically been on from the beginning. The person in charge, more or less, the one with the prescience, the current Quasar Hatterack, is basically trying to get all of humanity onto the golden path. And that has been Leto II's entire goal over these 3,500 years. He's been trying to solidify the golden path in order to guarantee the survival of humanity and avoid the tragic outcome that his father once saw. So this story feels to me a little bit like a bit of a race to the finish because a lot of Leto II's plans are basically coming to a head. They've reached their conclusion points to a degree, and there's also a lot of this resistance against this one ruler because the way he's stifled and stagnated the entirety of humanity, he's like lowered the ability for people to travel between planets and stuff, so everybody's just stuck on their world and stuff. So everybody's very restless and everything, and they just want to move. So there's like a lot more rebellion and stuff happening, and a lot of people want to take him out as emperor and get rid of him and stuff. And then there's rebels against the religion that's cropped up around him being God Emperor and everything. So there's just a lot of stuff coming to a head all at the same time. And it's kind of a race between Leto II finishing his plan to ensure that the golden path is followed in perpetuity, and for all the people who basically want their freedom back and stuff, and the freedom that they heard so much about through the histories and stuff of these other civilizations that have grown up in the universe. They basically are getting to the point where they're like, we got to take out the God Emperor. But interestingly enough, a lot of this stuff happens in such a way where it's like one person knew, then that person knew, then that person knew. So a lot of it has like these interesting twists and turns, and we find out different revelations about the way everything is planned out. And it kind of comes to this really interesting conclusion where it, to me, it feels a little bit like a stalemate. And I really like it because it plays a lot on the philosophy that Frank has been talking about since the very first Dune book. And this one to me feels like a great culmination. It's like the we should have been warned and we should have been wary of charismatic leaders and these messiah types and stuff. And that was very well emphasized with Paul. But then it's like there is a situation where that is actually not a terrible thing, and we have been shown to see that that is Leto II, where while he will do terrible things, it is ultimately for the greater good of the species. And I think that just creates a lot of interesting conversation topics and a lot of real good, like, thought discussion and stuff. It allows your brain to kind of just run around with it. So I really enjoy that. So I want to talk a little bit more in detail. So let's go ahead and jump over to the spoiler section. So spoiler warning for God Emperor of Dune, Dune book number 4 by Frank Herbert. So as I said, Leto II has been around for 3,500 years. Its entire plan has been to completely get humanity onto the golden path. And in this time, the sand trouts that have been bonded to him have completely started a metamorphosis in his body. So over the course of the last 3,500 years, he is becoming more worm-like and a lot less human-like. To the point now where his legs don't work. They're just like lifeless little flappers on him now that don't even like hold weight or anything. And like, so now his entire body is that of the worm, but his arms still kind of work, and his face is still like existing outside of the worm. But there's so many different interesting or artistic interpretations of the way he looks. I think it's really cool the way everyone imagines it a little differently, like the mouth of the worm is closing over his head, or like he's like the rest of his face and torso and stuff is going to become the head of the worm or something. So I think it's really interesting the way we can like hyper interpret it, because there's a lot of descriptions of Paul or of Leto in this form, but we don't get like to a great detail of description of it to where we know definitively what he looks like. Kind of like this Spacing Guild people. Like we know that they're mutated fish type people, but we don't get a very hard, clear description of them. So I like that that's carried over with this. It allows the audience to really run wild with our imaginations. So the nature of the golden path essentially is to make sure that humanity doesn't get to a point where there are so many different interrelated conflicts that eventually all of humanity destroys itself just through internal conflict. So Leto II understood that there's plenty of things that he needs to do that are terrible, that are just atrocious things that he needs to do, but ultimately it'll benefit in humanity's getting restless and like wanting to just basically scatter throughout the four winds of the universe instead of constantly bickering at each other and causing its own self-destruction. So essentially, he wants to make sure that the human race continues on in perpetuity instead of reaching this ultimate endpoint that ultimately was going to happen had he not interfered. And probably would have happened quicker if everything Paul did was just allowed to just keep going. So it's been 3,500 years, and Leto II has been implementing this birthing program similar to what the Bene Gesserit do. And his entire goal is to basically create someone who is immune from prescient sight. So basically, he gets to the point where he has created that person in Siona, and all of her children and descendants will have that same ability, which basically knocks out the entire nature of a Quasar and prescience and all that stuff. Because it seems that a lot of the issues that humanity is in and the necessity for the Golden Path comes about because of this nature of oracles and things. So the majority elimination of that ability allows humanity to go about on its own path that is completely unknown and undetermined, and allows humanity to then determine their own path. So in this time, Leto II has basically disbanded the Lancerat and only has like a few big houses left, and pretty much everyone is confined to their planet. There's no real jumping planet to planet. He has absolute control over the remaining spice in the universe, and it has completely terraformed Dune from a complete desolate desert planet to a lush forest green planet that only has this one singular location of desert, and that is at Paul's. I want to call him Paul, and that's at Leto II's Citadel. He has his own private desert, which he obviously needs because he's a sandworm, so he needs it for his own natural environment as well. At this point, the closest companions that Leto II has is basically a descendant of his sister Ganima. He is a long, basically played with Atreides. Like this guy is 3,500 years removed from when Leto II was born, but Leto has been selectively breeding the descendants of Ganima in order to basically make the Atreides line like awesome, along with other people that he's been breeding. So now, by the time we get to this point, all the Atreides blood is like they're like hyper fast. Like we already had the Weirding Way, which is already described as near like hyper speed kind of movement and stuff. But now we get to the point where there's a confrontation between one of the remaining Atreides and the Gola of Duncan, Idaho, where Duncan is one of the best known fighters. Like he is like famously known as a great fighter and stuff. So he tries to attack this guy, and he moves so effortlessly and quickly out the way that it just shows the difference in skill just based on natural breeding versus like centuries wrought skill kind of thing. So it's really interesting to see that Leto has been tempering with their genes and like just basically changing them from regular humans to something else. And that seems to have happened a lot over the universe. The Ixians have completely changed the nature of their physiology and stuff, and they are completely confined to their planets, and they're very xenophobic and stuff, similar to like the Talaxu and stuff. So it's like it's really interesting the way a lot of these species, or a lot of these different pockets of humanity, are almost branching off into different species. And I think it's really cool because the Golden Path is basically encouraging this, because they're confined to their planets and stuff until they get restless enough to just kind of scatter to the four winds of the universe. So, because of the way Leto has been ruling the universe, completely omnipotently, like one power and everything, no checks or balances or anything, of course, different rebels have popped up. And one of those rebels is Siona, one of the people that he has bred specifically to be immune from prescient sight. And he knows that she's a rebel. He knows that she's kind of against him and stuff, but it doesn't really affect his plan at all. So in the beginning of the story, she ends up stealing these journal. They're like printed on molecule thin crystal paper and stuff like that. It's really interesting future sci-fi tech or whatever. But essentially, it's to convey the fact that it's just so much information that it would literally take thousands upon thousands of years to go over, because it's information that's been written down and collected over the course of thousands of years. So that makes total sense. And this is kind of where we get a thing kind of like interlude. So we get a little bit of split in, like different passages from those journals that gives us a little bit more context to everything that has happened and things that are going on. And I think it's really cool because I love the interludes and stuff. I love the way Brandon Sanderson uses them in his stories. So to have that in this one, like, it feels very homey to me a lot, I guess. And I just really appreciate it a lot. So currently there are many plans that are in place that basically try to overthrow Leto II. And one of those plans is a woman that was created by the Talaxu, I believe. The Talaxu or the Ixian, I can't remember precisely right now. But she was basically designed to be someone that Leto II cannot resist falling in love with. She is designed specifically to take advantage of every last little bit of humanity he has in him, and it works perfectly. He falls completely in love with her, but at the same time, Duncan Idaho falls in love with her, the Karangola. Like, they have sex because they know that Leto can't have sex because he's a worm. like, so there's like just this whole interesting thing, and it adds to Leto's, or not Leto, to Duncan Idaho's dislike of Leto, and like kind of solidifies his desire to betray him. So it kind of culminates in a situation where Siona and Duncan decide to assassinate Leto II. But before that, Leto tests Siona, who is the daughter of his most prized Atreides companion, Mino. His name starts with an M, and I can't pronounce it. But basically, he understands that his daughter may or may not die during this test. So he, because of all the things that Leto's put him through, his test and all that stuff, and the level of loyalty he has to Leto, he completely accepts it and says, go ahead. So Leto takes her into his little mini desert place at the Citadel for multiple days, and he's just kind of testing her basically as a Fremen a little bit. And over the course of days, she doesn't use her still suit properly and ends up getting really dehydrated and almost dying. So Leto basically uses, him being a worm and his physiology. He has this like moisture or whatever that comes off of him, and like it's not contaminated, but it's like partially the spice melange. So like it sort of kind of awakens her to the to his prophecies and stuff a little bit, because she is in the Atreides and she has like remnants of that stuff from Ganima and all that, like the prescience ability. So she kind of understands what he's doing and she understands his plan, but that doesn't dissuade her from understanding that he needs to go. So it basically gets to the point where later on she then makes that plan with Duncan Idaho to assassinate him. So let's fast forward to the end of the book where it all basically happens. So the wedding procession with Leto II and Hui HWI, how weird name. Like, so his bride to be, basically, they're on the wedding procession or whatever. And one of the other rebels that Siona knows, like, she told her to take out this bridge that they're going to cross. So they're crossing the bridge because previously, during that test, when it starts to rain, Siona discovers that Leto II is weak to water. He has basically been proven to be invulnerable to pretty much any other type of attack, but water does not mix with his worm physiology. So she kind of realizes that's his weakness. So as they cross this bridge, the other rebel person shoots out the supports of the bridge and causes it to fall. And pretty much the entire wedding party falls to their death. And even Leto's wife to be, she like falls more or less silently and like tells him like she'll go on ahead, and like it kind of gave me the impression she really did care about him and stuff, and she really was emotionally attached to him and whatnot. But like everyone falls to their death and stuff, but Leto falls into the water, and like he doesn't die immediately, but like the water immediately has a terrible effect on him and starts to burn and dissolve his body and stuff. And the sand trout that are in him that are responsible for the metamorphosis, they basically detach from him and all scurry off into the wood, I mean off into the forest and stuff. And basically we know they go off to become new sandworms, because previously Leto has said that the sandworms that will come from him will all carry a piece of his consciousness. So they will be much smarter and much more dangerous and stuff when they repopulate the planet and whatnot. So on the basically on his deathbed, he crawls to like the bank of the shore as he's melting and dying and stuff, and letting off like spice smoke or whatever. Like he basically tells them like, yeah, Siona is completely immune to prescient sight. So pretty much upon his dying, Leto the second tells Siona and Duncan and the pretty much a couple other people that are still there that Siona and all her descendants will be completely immune to prescient sight. And he tells them that the horde, his giant horde of spice, is in the previous location of CH Tabor, which if anybody knew him as well as they should, it would have been a really obvious location. But because most of the people that knew about that CH are long since dead, I guess it was a perfect hiding spot. So now like everyone has spice again, like the lack of prescience ability or whatever will permeate throughout the humanity and all of that stuff. So they'll be immune to future sight and whatnot. And now everybody can like travel again. So now everybody's super restless. So it's basically predicted that they're all going to scatter to the four winds, like I've already said before. So it's a huge event called the scattering that takes place, where everyone leaves and everyone goes off into the, off into the universe, because everybody's just been so restless and stuck on their planets. So it basically guarantees humanity's future, because everybody is so now like everybody's so much back into exploring and all that kind of stuff that there's not like a lot of infighting that will eventually destroy the entire human race. So it was really, really cool. And essentially the golden path has been accomplished. Humanity is firmly on the golden path, and Leto can die knowing that he did all these terrible things and lived this long life, but he accomplished exactly what he was trying to accomplish, and it will be a great benefit to all of humanity. So that's essentially how God Emperor of Dune ends, and I think it's really, really interesting. I really like the development of the philosophy conversation that we've been having during these books, because the first Kwisatz Haderach, like Paul Atreides, like he was not a true Kwisatz Haderach, because at least in the definition of the way the Bene Gesserit wanted to work, because clearly that was Leto the Second. His ability to properly use prescient sight and make all these great decisions that led humanity onto the golden path, even though it was probably a lot of terrible, difficult years in between, especially for the people that, don't live 4 or 5,000 years or whatever. Like, so that like it's so interesting. Like it's the beginning, it's like it's the truest part of the conversation is really this idea of doing terrible things for the greater good. And Paul saw all the terrible things that he was going to have to do and basically couldn't seem to commit to it. Like he didn't seem to, like he saw what needed to be done, but like didn't feel like he really had the strength to truly do that, to carry it out. So that's probably another one of the reasons why he wasn't truly the Kwisatz Haderach. So that's why Leto the Second was able to do it. I think it's really, really cool. And like I said earlier, I think it's this real, real cool commentary on like be careful about charismatic leaders and stuff. It's like one can seem like a messiah figure, but they're actually a terrible influence and they're just going to mess stuff up. And then it's like, yeah, but there can be a charismatic leader who's not even truly charismatic, really. Leto the Second, he's born into his power and just immediately takes it. So it's not really, he doesn't come about his power the way Paul did. But it still feels like this commentary on like not all leaders are terrible kind of thing. There can be some that are, even in the short term, may do something that's kind of terrible, kind of less than savory, but they do sometimes have the greater good in mind. So I think it's a lot of interesting questions and thoughts that are put forth in this story, and I really, really like it a lot. And if you couldn't tell, this video is supposed to have a time-lapse painting to go along with it, but my footage of that painting got messed up. So I want to just go ahead and show you all the painting here. So I'm just going to place it over here and you can take a look at it, and make sure you follow me on Instagram so you can check out some more of my art. But as always, make sure you hit that like button and subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already. Let me know what your favorite part of God Emperor Dune was. Let me know about that in the comments down below. And I guess I will talk to you all next time.